Muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes. Estamos esperando que algo más de personas se incorporen a este panel. Tenemos muchos inscritos hoy día, así que estamos esperando que comiencen a integrarse. Sin embargo, alrededor de las 9:10 tenemos planificado el inicio del panel según programa, ¿ya? Así que estamos esperando en estos momentos que se incorporen. Bien, muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes. Como bien les dije, estamos esperando unos minutos que comience, se estén más inscritos en este panel. A las 9:10 comienzan las presentaciones, ¿cierto? Entonces voy a dar la bienvenida a esta actividad. Veo que ya hay bastantes personas que están en línea. Hay personas que nos han acompañado durante todo este tiempo. Bueno, aquí veo a Blanca, César, Fernanda, Francisca, otra Fernanda, se me empiezan a mezclar ahora a medida que van ingresando, Gabriela, Hugo, Yasna, Javier, Jorge, Juan Manuel, Lady, Luis, Susan, Verónica, Yang Sang. Así que estamos esperando unos minutitos y vamos a comenzar. Acá en Chile, para que el público de otros países esté al tanto, son las 9:05 AM, es decir, de la mañana, y estamos normalmente empezando la jornada laboral. Bien. Entonces, muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes, según la zona horaria en que nos encontramos. Saludo a todos los asistentes, como también saludo a todos los panelistas. Mi nombre es Verónica Villarroel, directora del Centro de Investigación y Mejoramiento de la Educación, y a nombre de la Facultad de Psicología de la Universidad del Desarrollo en Chile, quiero darles la más cordial bienvenida al segundo encuentro internacional virtual en enseñanza, aprendizaje y evaluación en educación superior. Hoy es nuestro 6º día de transmisión de esta actividad que realizaremos durante toda esta semana, hasta el día miércoles, ¿cierto? Antes de comenzar, quisiera, como siempre, darles algunas indicaciones respecto a la traducción simultánea de este evento. Esto que les contaré también está escrito en el chat, entonces lo van a ir viendo constantemente. Sé que hay personas que ya están acostumbradas y que han sido fieles a la asistencia a este panel y por lo tanto tienen absolutamente claro cómo hacerlo, pero en ocasiones hay personas que se integran a un panel y es necesario recordar. Recuerden que para seleccionar la interpretación simultánea deben seleccionar el icono del globo terráqueo que encontrarán en la barra inferior de su panel de Zoom. Al pinchar, selecciona el idioma en el que quiere escuchar toda la actividad, sin importar el idioma que hable el expositor. Entonces, voy a poner al menos en el chat esta instrucción. Entonces recuerden que pueden escuchar este panel tanto en español completamente como en inglés completamente. Los invitamos a participar de esta actividad realizando sus preguntas a lo largo de la sesión en la sección de preguntas y respuestas, que aparece con una Q y una A, que está en la barra inferior del Zoom. Les pedimos usar el chat en el caso de haber problemas técnicos. Les comento que esta actividad está siendo transmitida a través del canal streaming de la universidad uddtv.udd.cl y que durante los últimos días van a estar todos los videos disponibles de los participantes que aceptaron que su video fuera grabado. También están disponibles todos los PowerPoint en la página hasta el día viernes. Hoy día se están incorporando en el idioma original y traducidos en los casos que es necesario. Esperamos que hoy la tecnología y las conexiones nos acompañen, pero les pedimos también consideración si es que tuviésemos algún problema técnico durante la charla. Y comentarles también que siempre revisen nuestro sitio web de la página de la Facultad de Psicología, psicología.udd.cl, y nuestras redes sociales, @psicologiaudd. Va a iniciar este panel la doctora Päivi Tinjala con su presentación titulada Aprendizaje en la interfaz de la educación superior y el trabajo, experiencias de estudiantes, profesores y clientes en el lugar de trabajo. La doctora Päivi Tinjala es profesora del Instituto Finlandés de Investigación Educativa en la Universidad de Jyväskylä en Finlandia. El área de investigación de la profesora Tinjala es el aprendizaje y la enseñanza en la educación superior. Su investigación se centra en particular en el aprendizaje en la interfaz entre educación y trabajo, así como el desarrollo profesional de los docentes. Päivi ha publicado numerosos escritos, tanto a nivel internacional como nacional, y se ha desempeñado como editora en jefe de Educational Research Review. Actualmente es miembro del Consejo Internacional de Educational Research Review en ámbitos de vocaciones y aprendizaje. Quiero darle la más cordial bienvenida a Päivi. Es un agrado verla de nuevo acá. Ella ha estado con nosotros en Chile años antes, así que un gusto de tenerla nuevamente con nosotros. Puedes comenzar, Päivi.
Thank you very much, Veronica, and buenos dias, or good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are. Now, the important question, can you see my slides?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, great. At first, I'd like to thank the organizers of this conference for the invitation to be here. It's a great pleasure and an honor. And as you heard, I work at the Finnish Institute for Educational Research of the University of Jyväskylä, Finland. And in this photo, you can see a little part of our campus, these white buildings at both sides of the lake. And my office is in a small white building here. And as Veronica told you, my topic today is learning at the interface of higher education and work. And I have been working with this theme with my colleagues, Anne Virtanen, Eeva Kallio, Maarit Virolainen, and Hannu Heikkinen. And much of this presentation is based on our recently published book chapter, where we examine this topic from students, teachers, and workplace partners' point of view. But I will also refer to other studies as well, and here are some examples of those studies. But at first, some background. As we all know, we are living in a complex world, and we are facing many global challenges. And a few years ago, experts said that major challenges for future professionals are globalization, digitalization, and robotization. But now we see that sustainability and climate change and the pandemic are even more fundamental issues at the moment. And as regards higher education, I think we need to anticipate what kind of competencies our future graduates need when they move to work and deal with different global and local challenges. And in this table, I have collected some answers to the question, what kind of skills and qualities are needed in our complex world? World Economic Forum has listed top key skills, such as problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, technology use, and resilience. All these are important. But even at the beginning of the millennium, Ronald Barnett emphasized that not only competence or knowledge and skills are important, but also certain human qualities such as carefulness, thoughtfulness, and humility are needed. And recently, many researchers have started to argue that what we need above all is something that is called wisdom. And I think that our challenge is to develop higher education in a way that it contributes to the development of all these skills and qualities, but especially wisdom in our students. And the question arises how to do that. And so how to develop generic skills and human qualities and wisdom? And one possible answer would be by expanding contexts of learning and integrating and making connections between learning taking place in different contexts. There is a lot of research that showing that workplaces can be important sites for learning, both for employees and for students. And with my colleagues, we have been studying student learning at the interface between education and work for years. And next I will present you some findings of our studies. And these findings are based on studies listed here. And in these studies, we have examined two kinds of work-related or work-integrated learning. First, work-based learning, where students are working at the workplace as trainers. And second, work-related learning, where students carry out a project or some other commissioned assignment from the workplace. But actual working takes place mainly at the university and only occasionally at the workplace. And in one of our recent studies, we have elaborated a classic BICS model of learning for the purpose of describing student learning at work. And I don't go into details now, but most important words are those three with initial letter P: presence, process, and product. Presence factors are background factors related to learners and related to context, such as workplace and interface of education and workplace. Process factors describe activities related to actual learning processes, and product factors represent learning outcomes. So next I discuss the question how do students, teachers, and workplace partners describe the presence, process, and product factors of student learning in work-integrated study models and work-based learning? And here is a summary of presence or background factors experienced by students, teachers, and workplace partners in our different research studies. As to student factors, age, class, and previous work experience and their earlier studies have proven important. For example, for beginning students, entering workplace may cause anxiety, and they need more support and guidance than more advanced students. And maybe they need more different type of work-integrated learning, like observing at the beginning and real working only a bit later on. Student motivation plays also an important role in learning. On the context-related factors, our studies have shown that it is crucial that the workplace assures active membership to students. This means that they are giving meaningful tasks and their opinions will be asked and so on. So the workplaces and mentors there, they value students' skills and knowledge. Equally important seems to be that learning at work is integrated with learning at university or at school, so that there is connection between theory and practice. And here is an example of a study where we examined which factors predict students' self-perceived learning outcomes in work-based learning in 6 different fields. Active membership ensured by the workplace was the most important predictor. The second important was the integration between school learning and workplace learning. And the next important factors, invention orientation and learning orientation, they are related to student motivation. So these findings show that student motivation does not alone explain learning outcomes, but the context factors related to workplace and the university or school may play even more important role in integrated learning. And in our research, we have found that in some fields, sorry, now I'm talking something else. This integration was missing in some of our studies. And this means that students' work experience in these studies or these workplaces remained as a separate entity from their other studies. So in our studies, the processes Anyway, it seems crucial that this integration of learning at school and at workplace, it is crucial for learning, and it is teachers' job to guide students to integrate these activities. So sometimes it has been missing. Sorry, now I think I have another slide. Sorry, I didn't remember to turn to the right slide. So for workplace partners, processes of university collaboration of workplace partners have included not only working together with students as a mentor or expert guide, but also learning with students. They talked about learning about students' guidance needs and tasks planning, but also the subject of the project. So mentors learned as well. And students, they emphasized that they have to take a responsibility for learning much more than in the classroom. And in some studies, students also talked about reflective activities and this integration of theory and practice, but this was sometimes missing in these studies, as I just mentioned. So in some of our studies, this integration of school learning and workplace learning was regarded as most important factor that explained students' perceived learning outcomes at the workplace, while in some other studies it was the second important, as I showed in another slide. And then I think we need to go to, sorry, I can't, the problem is that I can't see the title. Yes, now I am in product factors. Okay, so this table shows the outcomes of product factors for work in integrated learning. And you can see here that students reported a wide variety of skills they had learned, and many of those skills were included in the list I showed you before. For example, social skills, thinking skills, and reflection skills. And some of them were also elements of wisdom, such as domain-specific knowledge, critical reflection, responsibility, and other self-management skills. Similarly, teachers recognized the skills and knowledge development of students, but they also noticed that motivation of students increased and dropout of students decreased as a result of work-integrated learning. And here is now, for some reason, I can't move my slide. This is a problem. I should move, now it turned, yeah, okay. So this is an example of a study we have where we examined intrinsic motivation of students during a course where they carried out a commissioned project for business or public sector organizations. And these studies, these students were studying information system design. And at the beginning and at the end of the course, students answered a questionnaire about their motivation and self-regulation and learning. And in this figure, we can see from this solid line that those students who scored high in self-regulation of learning also scored high in intrinsic motivation at the beginning of the course. And at the end of the course, their motivation remained high. But those students who had low self-regulation, this dotted line here below, they had the lowest motivation at the beginning of the course. But their motivation increased significantly towards the end of the course. So in terms of motivation, these students with low self-regulation and low motivation, they benefited most of work-integrated project work. Teachers also felt that they themselves benefited from deeper relationships with workplaces in terms of professional development. And teachers similarly recognized the skills and knowledge the students had. Oh, I think I said this already. And teachers thought that they had gained insight into changing competence needs and demands in the world of work. And they had learned new ways to working as a teacher, and they had got new skills as a teacher. Also, workplace mentors listed several benefits from university collaboration. Some of them told that when they are too busy to experiment with some kind of development need, they can assign the task to students, and at best, new products or new services or new practices may arise. They also said that when students arrive to the workplace, employees may need to reflect on their possibly bad practices and renew them so as not to teach bad practices to students. And sometimes employees may become interested in learning and professional development because of students' presence and new knowledge they have. And also students can be seen as potential new employees and help in rush seasons. Sorry. Okay, now I find this. Our studies have shown that in addition to many positive things, there are also some challenges in work in integrated learning. And as to students, one challenge may be coping with emotions. As I mentioned earlier, students may feel anxiety about work-related learning or work-based learning. The emotions may also vary during practical training or project work from positive to negative and back to positive. And the same things like teamwork may sometimes be experienced as a positive thing and sometimes as a negative thing. And therefore, it is important to prepare students to cope with emotionally charged and challenging situations and provide support during their work experience. Also, another challenge for students may be the lack of integration of connection between theory and practice. And therefore, it is important to guide students to reflect on workplace practices with the light of theoretical knowledge. And this reflection may be individual or peer reflection, and also technological tools can be used as helping this reflection. And as Stephen Willett has stressed, reflection is important in all phases of work experience, before, during, and after it. For teachers, challenges of work-integrated learning can be summarized with two words: changing work. When they move from classroom teaching to workplace collaboration, they need to renew their pedagogy, less lecturing and more guiding. An old saying, from sage on the stage to guide on the side, has been used to describe this type of change in teachers' work in general and regarding work-integrated learning in particular. Another change is moving from individual to network type of working. Organizing work-integrated learning requires networking and collaboration with workplaces, and often also with other teachers. Sometimes teachers find challenging the fact that they can't control work-based learning. And for this reason, good relations with workplaces are important. For work-integrated project assignments, teachers have more opportunities to follow and guide students working than in work-based learning. Variation in the quality of workplaces in terms of supporting learning is also a challenge for many teachers. Most workplaces, they support student learning in many ways, while some others are less supportive. For this reason, it is important that students can have work experience in more than one workplace during their studies. And it is important that after work experience, there are sessions where students and teachers can share their experiences. And then maybe the students with bad experiences can learn something from those students, those other students who have had good experiences. And of course, reflecting bad experiences is important as well for learning. So all these changes in teachers' work mean that they need new skills and competencies. And professional development is crucial in this field. Although workplace partners mainly find students' work-integrated learning beneficial for their organization, they also meet some challenges. As you know, employees are busy, and supervision, guidance, and mentoring of students takes time from their work input. On the other hand, students may help level out working load of employees. Variation in skills of students, mentors' insufficient knowledge about curricular goals, and different time schedules between education and work are also experienced as challenges by workplace mentors. So negotiations and agreements about goals, guidance, and assessment between universities and workplaces are important for dealing with all these challenges. And here is a summary of the challenges of work-integrated learning, but I think that I skip this now. I have already said these things. And here are some recommendations for work-integrated learning. Maintaining connections between the university and the workplace requires what Stephen Billett and his colleagues call partnership work, including negotiations of principles and practicalities. It's also important to make an agreement about goals, guidance, and assessment. And preparing students about practices, procedures, learning tasks, as well encouraging active agency and providing guidance are crucial. Assigning tasks in which students connect theory and practice are also important for learning. We also recommend arranging different forms of work-integrated learning for beginning and advanced students and taking individual needs into account. Reflection, feedback, and tripartite assessment, where students, teachers, and workplace mentors assess together students, have proven useful for learning. And as work-integrated learning changes teachers' work, it is important to support teachers' professional development and collaborative working cultures in departments and universities. And supporting workplace trainers or mentors is equally important. Safe and open and dialogical atmosphere is always worth nurturing. And finally, evaluation of the quality of work-integrated learning is important every now and then. So far, I have been talking about work-integrated learning, but we have also examined what kind of pedagogical methods explain the development of generic working life skills in classroom. And we got interesting findings of our studies. For example, that pedagogy, including students' critical inspection of knowledge in different ways, and positive learning atmosphere during the course predicted most the self-assessed development of resourcefulness, innovativeness, and creativity, whereas lecturing correlated negatively with these variables. In other words, the more they were lecturing in these courses, the less students felt that they had learned creativity or resourcefulness or innovativeness. And another variable measuring creativity, ability to operate in new situations, was explained by the interface, by acting at the interface between theory and practice, and sharing and utilizing students' earlier experiences and knowledge. And here, reading loaded negatively to this variable. Thus, the more reading was included in the course, the less students felt that they had learned to operate in new situations. Interaction between theory and practice was also important for learning general problem solving. Critical inspection was important for learning critical thinking skills, and working together with others and assessment of other students' work and tasks, including feedback and assessment and summarizing. They predicted decision-making skills. And for problem-solving skills, acting at the interface between theory and practice was important. Also important for general problem-solving skills and ability to solve occupational problems. And working together with other students, and these tasks or including assessment of other students' work, they predicted problem-solving skills. And reading and working alone, they correlated negatively with problem-solving skills. And then there are continuing learning skills, and again, critical inspection of knowledge and assessing one's own work explained continuing learning skills, and assessment of one's own work and feedback assessment and summarizing tasks predicted self-assessment skills, which was not any surprise. And finally, we have three kinds of social skills: interaction skills, collaboration skills, and looking at things from other people's perspective. And here it is no surprise that working together with others explained all these skills, and also sharing and utilizing students' earlier experiences and knowledge was also important for interaction skills. And again, these tasks, including feedback, assessment, and summarizing, and acting at the interface between theory and practice, were explained the collaboration skills and looking at things from other people's perspective, which are also important for important social skills. And here, negative correlations were found with feedback and evaluation given by teacher. It correlated negatively with looking at things from other people's perspective, and listening correlated negatively with interaction skills. So I think these are quite interesting interesting findings about learning generic skills in the classroom. And then it is time for conclusions. Altogether, our studies show that it is possible to learn generic working life skills both at work and in the classroom. Vital factors in students' workplace learning are active participation ensured by the workplace, integration of theory and practice or school learning and workplace learning, guidance and feedback, and student motivation. As to classroom learning, different forms of pedagogy seems to develop different kinds of skills. Therefore, diversified pedagogy is needed to support the development of diversified work-life skills and knowledge. And traditional forms of teaching and learning, like lectures, reading, and working alone, seem not to develop generic skills, but it is important to remember that they are still important for acquiring knowledge and developing understanding. Thus, we recommend diverse pedagogy, including both collaborative and individual working, sharing and utilizing students' knowledge and experiences, both lectures and reading, but integrated with learning tasks, which involve critical reflection and summarizing, giving and receiving feedback, self and peer assessment, connecting education and work, and integrating theory and practice. And in the future, it is important to examine this kind of pedagogy not only from the perspective of learning generic skills, but also from the perspective of the development of wisdom. So now I am curious to listen to other two lectures and hear questions or comments afterwards. And now I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a ti, Päivi. Muy interesante tu presentación, muy atingente, ¿cierto? A todo lo que queremos desarrollar con los estudiantes. Es un desafío el desarrollo de competencias genéricas, por lo tanto, las luces que tú das con la pedagogía diversificada resulta de mucho interés. Muchas gracias. Bien, entonces, ahora vamos a presentar, como el programa lo plantea, la ponencia de la doctora Ailey Tum, titulada Apoyando el aprendizaje y evaluando habilidades genéricas en educación superior. La doctora Ailey Tum es profesora de educación superior, trabaja como directora del Centro de Enseñanza y Aprendizaje Universitario, la sigla es HYPE, de la Universidad de Helsinki, Finlandia. La doctora Tum es también directora del programa de doctorado Psicología, Aprendizaje y Comunicación. Tiene una cátedra adjunta en la Universidad de Finlandia Oriental y es profesora invitada de la Universidad de Tartu, Estonia. Actualmente es presidenta de la Asociación de Investigación Educativa en Finlandia, cuyas siglas son FERA. Sus intereses de investigación incluyen el conocimiento de los maestros, la agencia y la educación de los maestros, así como la erudición de la enseñanza y el aprendizaje. Investiga el aprendizaje de los estudiantes de conocimiento laboral y competencias globales, las pedagogías y tecnologías digitales que apoyan el aprendizaje en los contextos de la educación básica, secundaria superior y superior. Lidera y codirige varios proyectos de investigación sobre estos temas y supervisa estudiantes de doctorado junto a sus colegas de investigación. Asimismo, forma parte de consejos editoriales de diferentes revistas y ha actuado como revisora de muchas revistas científicas, conferencias y programas de investigación internacionales. Bienvenida, Auli. Estamos muy interesadas en conocer tu investigación y tu presentación, así que puedes comenzar.
Yes, thank you very much, Veronica, for your kind words, and thank you very much for inviting me as a speaker to this very impressive conference that you are organizing. And good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are at the moment. As Veronica said, my title today is Supporting Learning and Assessing Generic Skills in Higher Education. I have been investigating and developing these issues practically in our university for the degree programs in different disciplines. And we have had several research projects going on related to these issues. I have some overlaps, of course, with these things that Päivi already presented, and it is, I think, the idea of hold this session that we elaborate the same issues from slightly different perspectives. We have also quite recently collaborated with Päivi in terms of a very broad research and development project related to these generic skills and working life skills development in higher education. Päivi was the director of the whole project, and it involved several higher education institutions in whole Finland. We have also projects funded by the Academy of Finland and EU regarding the topics that I am talking today. So on this slide, you see the overall structure of my presentation today. First, some introductory words related to the topic, then some definitions and understandings from earlier research that what is actually meant by generic skills, why they are emphasized to be important for students in higher education to learn, why they are so topical at the moment, what do we know about supporting student learning of generic skills in higher education based on our own research and other researchers' studies, what have been found as enhancing and impeding factors, and what kind of efforts have been made to support student learning of generic skills in higher education on curricular level, on course design level, and on pedagogical practices level, referring to the interaction between teacher and students. I think that it is quite widely agreed that during university education or higher education, students are expected to learn especially discipline-specific knowledge and skills and generic skills relevant for their profession and future work as academics in different tasks and professions related to the discipline. But as we heard already, based on Päivi's talk, conceptions regarding academic expertise and necessary knowledge and skills have changed rapidly during the recent years. I would say that during the past 5 or 10 years, it has increased significantly, that we emphasize, and educational policymakers and researchers and practitioners emphasize the importance of learning generic skills or working life skills or work-related skills already during higher education studies. And we understand, and many other researchers as well, understand generic skills as key capabilities for academics to be able to work in changing professional environments and develop throughout the career. So it is not only that they are able to study in university or in higher education, but the current and future working life is assumed to be so that academics or academic professionals need this kind of skills for their learning and development throughout the career and in different positions and workplaces and tasks that they are doing after the completion of the university studies. And I would like to say that university education is one of the most important interventions for young generations' life and learning that we do systematically. And it really matters that what kind of pedagogies we use in higher education when we try to cultivate students' discipline-specific knowledge and skills learning, but also generic skills learning that we perceive relevant for studies in higher education and collaborative academic work in the future after the university education. I think that it's a very interesting question that what is actually meant by generic skills. Researchers talk about them, they define them theoretically and conceptually, and we have learned that the definitions are really versatile and varied. There are different kinds of emphasis, perspectives, viewpoints brought in to the discussion of the generic skills. And some researchers grasp generic skills as wholeness, including several different kinds of aspects like critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, communication. And some researchers explore specifically, for example, critical thinking or argumentation or self and co-regulation of learning. And this all versatility exists at the moment. Generic skills are also defined and discussed extensively in educational policy documents and in curricula of higher education, and actually also in educational policy documents preceding higher education, upper secondary and also comprehensive school. So these are identified as really key skills or capabilities that need to be learned during the educational path. And what we have also perceived is that generic skills vary a lot from practical to a very complex skills to very analytical and intellectual skills, depending on the emphasis that the researchers or practitioners take in various contexts. We have also found and realized that not only the various researchers, but also when we look at the research done in various disciplinary contexts, there is a variation that how generic skills are understood and defined. Hard disciplines and generic skills related to them can be slightly different compared to those that are emphasized in soft disciplines. Also in basic sciences and applied sciences, there are differences regarding the emphasized generic skills. But still, it is possible to say that there are more similarities between the researchers regarding these different disciplinary contexts than differences. So there are certain generic skills that they all agree to be important. And they are considered as generic and as important in any discipline. And what is also agreed that they can be developed and utilized in both university and work contexts. It is also quite typical to define and understand what we mean by generic skills by considering them together with domain-specific knowledge and skills. And it is quite easy for academic researchers and university staff or higher education staff to agree that, of course, we need to make sure that students learn these domain-specific knowledge and skills during university education, so that they understand the characteristics of their own discipline, how their discipline is, how it is in relation to other disciplines, closer or not that closer ones, that they know the main paradigms, theories, and concepts in their own discipline. They are aware of and can use central research methods that are typical for their discipline. They have some grasp or thorough grasp about the relationship between theory and practice within their own field. They know how to apply certain theories in practical situations in their discipline, and they are also able to conceptualize the practical situations and theorize and structure the practical challenges within their field by using some central theories in their discipline. And they are practically capable of applying scientific knowledge and skills to the practical challenges and problems that they face. But what we have noticed in our university, we have done for quite a long time, since 2015, the curriculum improvement and degree program reform, and this supporting student learning of generic skills is one of the most important issues. And there we have really identified that in principle, our staff members, they agree that of course students need to have strong critical thinking skills, strong argumentation skills. They need to be able to solve problems. They need to be able to regulate their own learning and work, and co-regulate the group work when they work with someone else. They need to be able to communicate their scientific knowledge and expertise in their field. They need strong intrapersonal skills and teamwork skills. They need to be able to use a variety of digital technologies fluently in their academic work. And quite recently, we have also agreed that sustainability perspectives and responsibility regarding not only myself, but in a variety of ways about the environment and surroundings has become important, and also adaptivity and flexibility as professional. These are in principle quite broadly agreed, but when it comes to practice of curriculum work or practice of one's own teaching and using different methods to enhance learning of these skills or assess these skills, it seems that it's relatively challenging for our staff. Still, we know that it is based on research. We know that it is for students, it's really important that they have strong generic skills. We have investigated, and other researchers have investigated student learning in higher education and found out that generic skills are related to learning of disciplinary knowledge and skills. This is quite classical work of Arum and Roxa. Maybe you are really familiar with this book. If not, I really recommend reading it. We have found in our studies that generic skills are related to collaborative work processes and joint efforts. They are also related to student study success. For example, higher grades from courses, higher thesis grades, and especially analyzing information, critical thinking, and making arguments, and looking for solutions. These all were related in higher thesis grades. And generic skills are also related to progress in university studies. But strong generic skills are not only important for studying in university, but they also matter when students transition from university studies to working life. They are related to development of expertise. They are related to satisfaction with degree and experiences of usefulness of degree of working life. And also, really importantly, for the employability and success in working life, as well as job satisfaction. So these are really big things, and it really matters how we aim at guaranteeing that our students learn as strong and versatile generic skills as possible. Of course, researchers and we also have found challenges in student learning of generic skills. Again, Arum and Roxa and also Päivi have found that some students' generic skills do not develop during higher education. And Arum and Roxa has even the finding that some of the students go backwards in their mastery of generic skills. And of course, this is really concerning. And because strong generic skills are related to learning of discipline-specific skills, of course, it's understandable that if generic skills are underdeveloped, disciplinary knowledge may be difficult to learn. So this shows that generic skills are tools for learning in university. And we have found, and our other colleagues in Jyväskylä University have found that there is a great variation in students' entry-level generic skills. Some students have really strong mastery with generic skills than others. And although, for example, in our contexts, we have certain fields are really competitive, so we have quite strict entrance examinations that also focus on academic qualities and characteristics of our applicants. Still, we can find quite huge variation in their generic skills. So we all agree, or we agree with several researchers and practitioners, that it's really important that we take into account student learning of generic skills. And what we as teachers and staff members can do, we can think about the curriculum, what kind of curriculum we have, how we build the courses in the curriculum, and what kind of pedagogical practices and methods we use on course level in order to make sure that this happens in a variety of ways. So we take this kind of systemic approach to this issue. So the coherence of the curriculum in terms of learning of generic skills and their systematic integration to learning goals, course contents, all the assignments that the students do, and the assessment in all courses is really, really essential. We know that student learning of generic skills is a long process, and they need to be able to practice generic skills in different contexts by doing various tasks combining theory and practice, working alone, working in different kinds of group compositions throughout the studies is very important. So from our perspective as teachers and staff who teach and are responsible of student learning need to take this variety and these possibilities seriously and really make the curriculum as coherent as possible. Of course, we know that universities have also organized and emphasized organizing some specific courses related to generic skills. Of course, that may help a little bit, but it is inadequate. But it's very important to integrate learning of these skills throughout the curriculum. But why it is challenging, it requires, of course, teachers that teachers are aware of this. They have pedagogical expertise for doing it. And especially when it comes to curriculum work, they need to collaborate in order to make the curriculum as coherent and as aligned as possible. And that might be challenging sometimes. And we also know, based on research, that some researchers and some practitioners have taken a collaborative work perspective when trying to enhance student learning of generic skills and academic knowledge practices. And several researchers have found that certain practices in this kind of approach are really essential for student learning of generic skills. It has been found that if students have a shared object as a core of their collective work, if it integrates individual efforts and collective efforts, that's effective. If it allows use of relevant digital technologies, if it's possible to receive and provide continuous feedback, and if they have the possibility to work persistently in developing the shared knowledge objects. These all elements are important in collaborative knowledge work and in supporting student learning of generic skills. We also know that single pedagogical methods and approaches, not that holistic one that I presented in my earlier slide, but the single methods that teachers have applied are beneficial for promoting student learning of generic skills. There are quite extensive amount of research on problem-based collaborative learning, project-based collaborative learning, integrative pedagogy, collaboration with multidisciplinary working life experts, and work-integrated learning that have been shown effectively. Also, the use of concept maps, real and authentic dilemmas and performance tasks, use of versatile knowledge sources, and long and collaborative work processes are effective in student learning of generic skills. The key is that students' role is active and they have agency in terms of their own learning and possibility to regulate it themselves throughout the process. We also know that assessment plays a key role in student learning in general, and also in student learning of of generic skills. And this also relates to the coherence and alignment of the curriculum. And when and if both discipline-specific and generic skills are set as learning goals in the curriculum, it is very important that these are also assessed in the different courses. So what is aimed? So it is important that it is also assessed. And assessment is a very powerful tool in teaching and learning process, and that's why it really should focus on those issues that students are aimed to learn. And here we also come to the challenges that we have also faced practically. So teachers are traditionally very used to assess discipline-specific knowledge and skills, and they find it really challenging to assess student learning of generic skills. So, and set criteria, for example, assessing learning of critical thinking or problem solving, all collaboration skills, or this kind of things. But they need to be integrated to the assessment if they are set as learning goals. And students' active role also in assessing own learning of generic skills is very important. And it is also very important that when we think about the assessment and also assessment of learning of generic skills, that we take into account the different phases of learning process, so that we do diagnostic assessment before the course that is aligned with learning goals, and students and teachers become aware of the knowledge and skills levels and expectations before the course, and students' current knowledge and skills and relevant skills regarding the course are activated, and that we use a variety of assessment methods already in this phase. Really important for learning of and supporting learning of generic skills is that the assessment during the course is done in multiple different ways. And again, the alignment with learning goals is really important here as well. And so that few students give and receive feedback during the learning process. They also receive feedback from peers and teachers, and they also evaluate themselves. And it is also important that the focus of assessment changes when it comes to formative assessment, so that issues that are at the focus of learning, they are also in the focus of formative assessment. And of course, this is the traditional way of assessing students that we tend to do at the end of the course or after the course. It is of course important as well. Again, alignment is very important, but also that it provides information on how students have learned, what they were supposed to learn. And it helps students and teachers in identifying the strengths and further areas of development when students enter to next course in the program, so they have this information in mind. But what I want to emphasize here, that it's really important to use a variety of assessment practices to support student learning of generic skills. And here is one slide related to self and peer assessment, why it is especially important. They are the activities that really activate students to think about their goals and what they have achieved and how far they have gone. It develops their reflective skills. They also combine learning and assessment processes, because they reflect what they have done and how they have worked, what kind of strategies they have used, what kind of challenges they have faced. These assessment practices also support higher quality learning outcomes. Students receive feedback about their own learning. It can, to some extent, reduce teachers' workload. And it, of course, requires clear assessment criteria and instructions so that students are able to do aligned assessment. So what I want to emphasize here, that it's really important that we promote student learning of generic skills systemically, on curriculum level, on course level, and on teaching and learning situations. And that the goals that we set, the contents that we choose, teaching and assessment methods and assignments that we choose, they are really aligned and they support student learning of generic skills. And I really am aware that this is this is challenging, but this is the way to go and the direction to go when we build stronger and more relevant curricula for higher education. And of course, we know that there are challenges in integrating learning of generic skills to curricula and courses. This requires quite advanced and developed curriculum thinking and understanding and designs. And it requires that we have more resources to support student learning. We also have noticed, as I already mentioned, that there is lack of understanding of importance of student learning of generic skills among staff members, among degree program directors, and of course students themselves. They are, in a way, traditionally they are embedded to the teaching and learning of domain-specific things, and they are sometimes quite challenging to explicate. And what I mentioned also earlier, that teachers perceive that they lack pedagogical skills, skills related to teaching and assessment methods to support student learning of generic skills. I wanted to finalize my presentation by showing an example that we have created for our university. As I told in the beginning, we have had a degree reform going on in our university since 2015. The emphasis has been on working life relevance, student learning of both discipline-specific and knowledge and generic skills, employability of our students after they complete the studies. And we have done this work quite intensively. And now we have again curriculum work going on. And it is especially the issues related to generic skills and how to support their learning in the curricula and the degree program level and on individual course level. So we have tried to create support materials that are concrete enough so that our degree program directors and boards of directors and individual teachers could utilize in their work, so that they are concrete enough for these processes. And here you can see in this column as examples self-regulation and management skills, communication and interaction skills and collaboration skills, research skills and scientific thinking, and identifying own expertise. And we have given these as examples of generic skills. Of course, they are not the only ones, but our degree programs can choose which generic skills learning and they emphasize, but these are given as examples for them. And here you can see the study years. So first year, second year, and third year. And here we have tried to describe that what kind of aspects related to self-regulation and management could be at the core in the first year, how this could be continued in the second year, and what we think that could or should happen in terms of this self-regulation and management in the third year with this, that is the final year in master's degree. And same is here, communication, what to do in the first year, how to continue in the second year, and further in third year. And what I can say is that this has been experienced really beneficial and concrete help in the degree programs when they develop the curricula, and also the individual teachers when they design their own courses. Our teachers are quite autonomous in designing and deciding about the details of the course that they are responsible of, as long as it follows the curriculum that is accepted by the faculties. So these have been experienced as really important examples. I want to thank you for your active listening and attention. As I said, I have been doing this work, and I'm doing this work in collaboration with several colleagues, both nationally and internationally. Liisa Ilomäki, Minna Lakkala, Hanni Muukkonen, Heidi Hyytinen, Tarja Tuononen, and Katri Kleemola. And we have received funding from various sources, Academy of Finland, Finnish Ministry of Education and Culture, and Horizon 2020. So thank you very much for listening.
Muchas gracias, Auli. Muy interesante también lo que nos has contado y muy alineado, ¿cierto?, con lo que también nos contó Pai. Vamos ahora a dar inicio a nuestra tercer panelista. En estos momentos nos va a presentar su ponencia la doctora Kathleen M. Quinlan, que nos presenta el tema ¿Cómo hacer la enseñanza en educación relevante para las esperanzas e intereses de los estudiantes? La doctora Kathleen M. Quinlan actualmente es profesora de educación superior y directora para el Centro de Estudio de la Educación Superior en la Universidad de Kent, Reino Unido. Desde 1990 ha contribuido a la investigación y la práctica de la educación superior a través de puestos académicos y de liderazgo en universidades líderes del mundo en Estados Unidos, Australia e Inglaterra. Es autora de más de 45 artículos de revista, revisados por pares, 2 libros y 10 capítulos de libro. Es conocida por sus investigaciones sobre desarrollo de los estudiantes de la educación superior y la especificidad de la disciplina en el aprendizaje y la enseñanza. Su investigación actual se centra en despertar y apoyar el interés de los estudiantes en educación superior. En los últimos 10 años ha sido investigadora principal de subvenciones del Center of Transforming Access and Student Outcomes, el programa de siglas de educación superior, ¿cierto?, de STEM, de la Royal Academy of Engineering Leadership Foundation of Higher Education y su propia universidad, así como co-investigadora becada de la Unidad Asesora de Carreras de Educación Superior. Durante este tiempo ha dado más de 30 charlas y conferencias magistrales. Agradecemos, Kathleen, que estés acá y te doy la bienvenida y puedes comenzar.
Thank you so much. Buenos dias y buenas tardes. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's a beautiful sunny afternoon here in Canterbury, England. Thank you so much, Veronica, for the invitation. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be participating in this conference with so many impressive speakers from around the world. So in my talk today, see if I can get these slides to move forward. A longstanding principle of effective learning in higher education is to ensure that learning is relevant to students. Relevance can be defined as a learner's subjective sense of the extent to which an object, and by object I mean a topic or a learning activity. I don't just mean a thing like a stapler. So the extent to which this instruction or topic or learning activity is personally meaningful to them. So it's about a personal connection that students have. In this talk, I will present a series of studies that I've conducted that are all related to the question of how we can make teaching relevant to students' hopes and interests. So first, in order to make it more relevant, we need a better understanding of what students find to be what they find personally meaningful in higher education. So in the first study, my colleague Alina Salmon and I surveyed students to determine what students' hopes were for university study. So in this online survey, 1,772 first and second year undergraduates who were enrolled in a UK university that was ranked kind of in the middle of the UK league tables answered a simple question. And it's useful to note that the students were mainly traditionally aged, that is to say, they were 18 to 21 years old. They were also racially and culturally diverse, and they were enrolled in a wide variety of different subjects, both pure and applied subjects. So we simply asked them, when you decided to come to this university, what learning experiences did you want? And we then thematically coded their open-ended responses, which averaged about 20 words per response. And first, we coded them very close to the language that the students used themselves. And then we grouped them into higher order categories. And in part, that was informed by my own 2016 paper, in which I examined how emotion matters in 4 key relationships in higher education. So in that 2016 paper, I proposed that students have 4 key emotional relationships during higher education. That they have a relationship with their subject, indicated here by the compass symbol. That they also have and value and need an important emotional relationship with their teachers, with their peers, and with their own growing selves. So here I was emphasizing the idea that as students grow and in their understanding of the subject, they're also understanding the world and their place in it differently. They're growing in confidence, perhaps, or a sense of what's right or just in the world. So this is a changing relationship with their own selves and their knowledge and priorities and understanding of what constitutes knowledge. So I've characterized these as emotional relationships in order to emphasize the more human dimension of education that's often lost in our talk about thinking and analysis and problem solving, and to some extent to doing practical aspects, but we tend to speak less about emotion when researching higher education. So in that 2016 paper, I proposed ways that teachers could strengthen each of these key relationships. And here I want to, though, move on rather than summarizing that paper, which you can look at your leisure. I would like to move on to talk a little bit about what I found in this study with Alina Salmon about what students' hopes were, and then reconnect that back to that framework of student hope, students' key relationships. So what we found is that 20% of students referred to things related to exploring the subject. And so these were things that students might have said, I want to broaden my knowledge of politics, for example. 15% of students talked about wanting to, I've slightly lost track of my pages here. 15% of students talked about wanting to apply learning. And so some examples were things like, I wanted to broaden my understanding of the types of management roles that are applicable to business today and the techniques that managers use. So this would be a student studying business, perhaps. Or I wanted to embark on a rigorous course where the teaching was directly applicable and applied in real life scenarios. So that indicates that the kinds of things that students were saying here were related both to their careers or to real life scenarios that they might encounter in their personal life or in the community. What we also saw was a lot of students who spoke about both this interest in exploring their subject and also applying that subject. So 10% of students fit that category. So a student might have said, I want to learn about psychology and delve into the topics, indicating that wanting to explore the subject, and then said, and understand them in a real world context. I hoped that the lecturers would be engaging while doing this and really would heighten my interest in psychology. 11% of students talked about growing as a person. And in this case, they tended to talk about things like independent learning skills or to grow in confidence, or they might have even said grow as a person. 8% of students talked about wanting to interact with peers. So for example, I wanted to work with other students who shared a similar interest. And 3% spoke about wanting to interact with staff and having good supportive relationships with staff. So taking these lessons from this empirical study, we can go back to the initial model of 4 key relationships and to see whether this held up when looking at it more empirically through this approach. And what we see here in updating the original is that, yes, students do have hopes that are related to exploring the subject, to interacting with staff, to interacting with peers, and to growing as a person, what I had originally called a relationship with themselves. But what came through so very strongly in these findings was the importance of applying that learning. Typically, that was connected to their exploration of the subject. That was the explore and apply groups. But I think it's worth updating the original 2016 idea of 4 key relationships to suggest possibly 5 key relationships that need to be nurtured to make higher education relevant and meaningful to students. And that is to think about their connection to their relationship with the world at large, beyond the walls of higher education. And we did a follow-up study from this work in which I worked with Natalie Gentry to create a survey that allowed us to more easily measure students' hopes. which is an important step forward in the work, because simply asking a broad, open-ended question and having tens of thousands of words of response and trying to code them is not a practical way to carry on this kind of work. So we created 3 items for each of these 5 key hopes and tested that with a group of about 250 psychology students. And we found that it came out very similar to what we were proposing it did. So the study, the survey has good kind of dimensionality. And we also were able to validate that students tend to endorse multiple hopes. They tended to endorse all of these hopes on a Likert scale of 1 to 5. So the mean scores for explore subject, apply learning, and grow as a person were the largest, as reflected in these larger circles here. They had mean scores of between 4 and 5, which means important to very important to students. Interacting with peers and interacting with staff as hopes for higher education were also important, but not quite as important as those top 3. So they had mean scores of between 3 and 4, which would be somewhat important to important. So there was validation of the original study and this enhanced framework for thinking about students' key relationships in higher education. So why do students' hopes matter? First, these findings are important to reinforce that students do care about the learning process and their experience. Too often, I hear cynicism from teachers in more marketized higher education contexts, such as the UK, who say students behave like consumers of higher education, and they complain sometimes that students are more interested in getting a degree than learning or growing through their university experiences. And our findings suggest otherwise. Most of these 1,700 plus students we surveyed did have appropriate hopes for higher education that are aligned with traditional purposes of higher education. Second, understanding students' hopes matters because it means that we as teachers can design our instruction to appeal to these student hopes. Knowing what is personally meaningful to students allows us to connect to those hopes. It allows us to make our teaching more relevant, and it helps us to explain why we do certain things in our classroom in ways that will tap into students' hopes. So it helps us to explain our actions. So just as an example, when I was working on the project on student hopes, I was also talking with students about their most powerful learning experiences in higher education. And their powerful learning experiences often were situations in which their hopes were realized. For example, I remember interviewing one young female Black British social work student who told me about how when she went to class, the students tended to segregate themselves racially within the same classroom. So all the Black students sat on one side of the room and the white students sat on the other. And she explained to me how her teacher pushed the students to sit in different places and to discuss topics with peers they would not normally have associated with. And the student was telling me that this was uncomfortable at first for her because she didn't expect to be able to have to mingle with people unlike herself. But she says it was so powerful because she's now more comfortable in talking with anyone. And she attributed the effectiveness of this strategy to the teacher's explanation of why it was important, why she was choosing to push students into these uncomfortable situations. The teacher explained that it was important for the students to learn how to interact with a variety of people, particularly because they would need to do that in their social work careers. And this explanation helped the student to appreciate what she was learning and how what she was learning through this uncomfortable activity would help her to grow as a person and help her toward applying it to the real world, to help her in her aspirations to be a social worker. So there are lots of different ways and complex forms of instruction that can be used that can address all of these student hopes simultaneously. So some of the things that we've heard about even in the session here today around collaborative and cooperative learning, around work-based learning and placements, around problem-based and project-based learning, all of these things offer opportunities to be working on these 5 hopes simultaneously, exploring subject, applying it to real-world situations, working with teachers, working with peers, and growing as a person through generic skills, developing those generic skills that Auli was talking about. And so I'm not going to go through all of these kinds of examples. There's quite a body of literature on any one of these. And instead, what I'm going to do is to focus a little bit more on kind of the more traditional forms of instruction, everyday instruction. In particular, I want to show how it is possible to integrate these hopes to make instruction relevant to students' hopes, even through very traditional modes of instruction, especially since the most endorsed goal that student had was exploring a subject that interests them. Often it's lectures that are used to introduce the subject and to explain key concepts within the subject and to provide an overview and direction about what's being learned in the subject. So in this next study, I sought to understand how teachers can stimulate students' interest during lectures. Lectures have been a ubiquitous part of higher education for the entire history of the university, and even a pandemic, which kept people away from lecture halls in many parts of the world, does not seem to have killed lectures themselves. At my university, for sure, sometimes it's just meant that students are watching lectures on recordings of lectures instead of actually sitting in tiered lecture theaters. So the lecture is clearly not dead. So if this is a key instructional mode in which students are exploring and building their relationship with the subject, then what is it that students find most interesting in their lecture? So I rely on Renninger and Heady's model of interest development for my research into education for this study and some others that I'm not talking to you about today. This developmental theory defines interest as a tendency to or desire to engage with some object or content. Interest has cognitive, emotional, and motivational dimensions to it. It also has been shown to be connected to physiological or neurological bases, connected to our reward circuitry in the brain, which all sounds quite fancy, but really just what it means is that when people are interacting with something that they find interesting, it's rewarding to them in and of itself. And for teachers, this theory is particularly useful because it emphasizes both the fact that interest can grow. So instead of thinking about students as being motivated or not, it prompts us to think about what can we do to grow students' motivation, to grow their interest in a subject. And it also emphasizes the ways in which the environment, we as teachers can construct environments that help students to grow in their interest. So interest has been shown to develop over time through phases beginning from situational interest and extending through to well-developed individual interest. Situational interest tends to be just that. It's often triggered and sustained through supportive situations, and support from others is particularly important at the earlier stages of interest development, when that interest may be more fragile, might be more a momentary feeling of curiosity or desire to continue to engage with something, but perhaps only if it's easy to do so. So for example, if a friend of mine might drag me along to a physics public lecture. Now, normally I would not go to a lecture in physics. I've never taken any courses in physics and perhaps have never even sat in ever on a lecture in physics. So normally I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't say that I'm a person who's particularly interested in physics. But my friend drags me to this lecture, for example, and the speaker might be very engaging, very inspiring. I might become interested because of the way in which it's presented, because they've made it accessible, because they've connected it to things that I do care about, perhaps. So in that case, I have a situational interest. It's interest that's triggered right then and there. But I would probably need additional help in order to continue to explore that interest. Once I leave that lecture hall, I'll go back to my usual activities. But maybe my friend continues to talk with me about it, or my friend continues to take me to another lecture in this series that she's attending. Or perhaps she recommends a book for me about physics for the layperson that I can read for half an hour at bedtime and find interesting. So that would be an example of someone with quite a situational interest. And with proper support, it might grow, as opposed to someone who is studying physics at an advanced level. Some of you on this call might, in fact, be teaching physics. You would have a well-developed individual interest. You are going to study and research physics. You're going to read books about it. You're going to attend lectures about it voluntarily, independently, with a lot of knowledge. And you don't need your friend to drag you along. So with that as background, the aim, as I said, was to understand what triggers students' interest in lectures. So my research assistant, Sarah Fong, and I observed 12 first-year undergraduate lectures in various subjects, including 4 in the sciences and the rest in the social sciences. And we asked students who were attending to complete a short lecture, a short survey at the end of the lecture. We had 706 students complete that across the 12 lecturers. And we asked them on that to tell us about a particularly interesting moment, to identify the most interesting moment in the lecture. And then we asked them to rate a series of items related to that interesting moment. We had taken extensive notes during the observations, so we were able to match up what the comments that they made, the notes that they made about the interesting moments, and what we had seen. So let's have a look at the results of this survey to identify what can we learn about how to make lectures interesting. All right, so first we can look at the individual characteristics of the students, which is in yellow here. And you can see the numbers after it. 0.35 refers to a standardized beta. So there are 3 asterisks. Basically, what we can say is this is very unlikely this was by chance. And it shows that there's a strong relationship between whether a student is already interested in the subject and their interest in this particular lecture. That kind of makes sense. So those of you who are physics lecturers would probably find who already are studying and interested in physics would probably find that any given physics lecture more interesting than someone like me. So that makes sense. But what I was more interested to understand was the characteristics of what was happening instructionally in that particular moment. So what we see in the blue box are those instructional characteristics, and you can see several of those are significant and affect students in individual interest. It's their situational interest in that lecture. So what we see is that the perceptions of the teacher are one of the most important things. And what we mean by that is whether the students found the lecturer to be enthusiastic, approachable, and friendly. So we call those positive perceptions of the teacher. And that was strongly associated with their interest in the lecture. The second thing that was very important was what I called cognitive activation. That is, if students were stimulated to think, then they were more interested. The third was about usefulness. So usefulness is high when the information is relevant, important, and useful to a student personally, which also makes it more interesting for them. Cognitive incongruity also mattered here, and that means that the information contradicted a student's prior belief or presented something controversial. And finally, novelty. So a key Novelty is something new. So if students were learning about something new to them, that was also triggering their interest. It's also noteworthy that it's important that we have this at an appropriate level of difficulty. When students were over-challenged, that was negatively associated with interest. So we have to find the right level. Great. So we can look then more carefully at the particular interesting moments that they identified. So we've learned the general characteristics across all of the interesting moments, but we can look at what were these interesting moments students pointed to in each of the lectures. And usually there was quite good agreement among the students on just one or two key moments in the lecture that we could also readily recognize as observers. And those moments help us to illustrate how these factors are played out in the classroom. So several of the students' most interesting moments involved, unsurprisingly, applications to real life with examples that were connected to the students or to the lecturer. So for example, a lecturer in biostatistics. So this was a first-year biology course, and they were teaching this unit on statistics. And those of you who teach statistics, especially to students who are not mathematics students, know that this is often something that is difficult to get students interested in. So this lecturer created a story about his sister starting a business selling lab coats. And his sister had phoned him up on the weekend and asked if he would help her because she needed to know how big to make the lab coats. So could he measure his students to help her figure out what sizes to make these lab coats in? Now, it's a silly example. It's obviously fictional. His sister didn't call him up, but you could see that the students were chuckling over this and they were engaged because, in fact, all of them week after week are wearing lab coats to a lab. So it was relevant. And he then got out a tape measure, ran around the lecture theater and measured students, recording their heights, and used these various measurements to illustrate the key statistical concepts that he wanted to demonstrate that day. And this is what the students resonated with. In another example, a teacher was lecturing about social care and the problems with a lack of coordination of social care services for the elderly. And interestingly, she presented first a fictitious example of a Mrs. Smith here. And you can see Mrs. Smith is the title of this slide, and we have a very kind of cartoon-like picture of Mrs. Smith. So she presented this example of the difficulties that Mrs. Smith faces in coordinating the various care that she needs. And then she told a story of her neighbor who was elderly, who had a very similar kind of problem. And it was the story of her neighbor that students identified as particularly interesting, not this made up case example of Mrs. Smith. And I suspect that's because at that moment, the students were able to connect with the teacher as a person, as a human, much more so than they could with the Mrs. Smith example. We now know that this teacher is a real person who lives in an apartment and has a neighbor, and not only has a neighbor, but cares something about this elderly neighbor. So the lecturer becomes much more human and relatable. And so as we continue to unpick these interesting moments, several of the moments also involve teachers making more personal connections with the subjects, like the lecturer who was telling the example of her neighbor. But I also noticed a lot of the sorts of things that would have prompted students to have positive perceptions of their teachers. a great deal of enthusiasm shown. And it's really difficult for me to demonstrate this when I'm in a little tiny window here on your screen, because the point I want to make is that lecturers often use their body to help convey their enthusiasm for the subject. So we had one of the lecturers who was teaching about ballistics. So this was a forensics lecturer, and he began talking really excitedly about the longest recorded kill shot. And he was so excited that he got down on one knee and he got out he was pretending like he was shooting a gun. There, I did as best I could on screen here. It's not quite the same as him getting down on one knee at the front of the lecture theatre, but he was saying, oh, and that's ridiculous. It's crazy, the length of this shot. So what we see here, and this was the moment that really got students' attention. He was putting his whole body into the enthusiasm of the subject. Another one was a psychology lecturer, and she was also demonstrating something physically with her body. The behavior, she was using the behavior of her pet mouse to demonstrate issues with attachment, insecure attachment. And so she was miming how the mouse moved its body as it started to move out of the cage, and then became very fearful, and then ran back into the cage. And this also captured students' attention. And again, we had that personal connection, that we learned something about this lecturer, that she's had at one stage a pet mouse, which most people don't have. So we learned she also became a bit more human in that process. And just in case you fear that you're yourself not a flamboyant performer, there were other ways in which we observed these lecturers making connections with their students in a more personal way, without necessarily being such good actors on the stage, shall we say. So for example, one lecturer had been lecturing on a complex economic concept. And then he kind of paused and he walked forward, stepped out behind the podium, walked to the front row, and leaned over and asked people, he just said, "Are you getting this?" And then the students responded, "No, we're not. But sitting in the audience when he did this was spine tingling. It was so powerful, that moment, because he shifted from being on stage to actually acknowledging the students in the room, making a connection with them, noticing that they were real people, and shifting them to participants rather than audience in a very simple gesture. And what was interesting, he followed that up with saying, "Okay, let me try again." So he didn't blame the students for not getting it. He in effect said, "I need to do a better job of explaining this." So then he walked around to behind the podium again, and he tried again with a different explanation. So that was a really interesting, recognizing the emotion that is involved in these powerful moments in the lecture, these most interesting moments, is quite useful. So the conclusion of this study about lectures and how to trigger students' interest in lectures is to be interesting as a teacher, first of all, as I was just explaining with the case examples. This can help build the relationship between the students and the teachers, even if you have 300 students in a lecture theatre. Second, we can help students, make them think, to ask a question, give them a puzzle or a problem to solve. This helps them to connect to exploring the subject, which is what so many of them hope to do in higher education. We can also show them relevance and usefulness through relevant examples. This helps build on their hope of applying learning. We can present things that are incongruent or new, make something puzzling, highlight the way in which this might be unexpected. This can prompt a process of rethinking, which may help promote students' personal growth. And we know they want to grow as people. And finally, we of course always need to pitch it at the right difficulty level. So just to sum up then, we know from decades of research on undergraduate education that making learning relevant enhances the quality of students' learning and their learning outcomes. So it's incumbent upon us to design instruction that helps students to make personally meaningful connections to the topic, activity, and desired learning outcomes. And one way we can do that is to build on what students find personally meaningful. Specifically, we can tap into their hopes for their learning experiences. We see that students want to explore their subject, they want to apply learning, they want to grow as people, they want to interact with staff, and they want to interact with peers. And so we can build those opportunities for them to realize those hopes into instruction at all different levels, from the macro level right down to micro level, moment by moment interactions with students in classrooms. And if you want to learn more about any of these studies, I invite you to look at these papers that have been referenced during the talk. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for your attention, gracias, and for the invitation.
Muchas gracias, Kathleen. Muy interesante tu ponencia y también muy realista respecto a lo que uno esperaría que ocurriese en la sala de clases, ¿cierto? A partir de los reportes que nos entregan los estudiantes. Entonces quiero invitar ahora a Päivi y a Auli para que puedan prender sus cámaras para iniciar la ronda final con algunas preguntas. Muchas gracias a las tres, muy interesante todas sus ponencias, muy enriquecedoras y nos muestran como un fenómeno de distintos puntos de vista, ¿cierto? Como desde la voz de los estudiantes, desde quizás la interfaz que estudia Päivi entre el trabajo en terreno o el trabajo en el lugar de práctica y la universidad, y Auli como con todas estas disposiciones metodológicas para desarrollar competencias genéricas, así que ha sido un panel bastante enriquecedor. Y tengo acá algunas preguntas. Voy a partir primero con una pregunta individual para cada una de ustedes y voy a terminar con alguna general. Voy a partir con Päivi, ¿cierto? Aquí hay una pregunta que la hace Daniela Bruna y dice: ¿se pueden implementar estas formas de aprendizaje en el trabajo desde los primeros años de universidad? ¿Y qué elementos es importante tomar en cuenta para hacerlo?
Thank you very much. This was a very important question. And I think I referred to this question when I suggested that we should organize different kind of work-related learning for students in different phases in their studies. And as I said that very often the first year students may have anxiety or stress about going to new environment, to workplace, which can be a new experience for them. And therefore, I think that for the first year students, some kind of, the first time when they go to the workplace, some kind of observation tasks would be enough for them, not working, but some observations. And I think that when they are observing the work in the future professional field, the teachers should give them some tasks, what to observe and what how to observe. For example, think about some theories they have been studying and pick up some points from the theories, and that would be interesting to observe in the workplace. And then after this observing period, which could be quite short, not very long, the students and teachers could come together and they could discuss about their observations in the light of theories. So I think it is important to make connections between what has been studied at the university and what they have seen at the workplace. And I think this kind of activity would be useful to anyone, but especially for first-year students. So that was something that came to my mind at first. Thank you. That was a very good question, Carla.
Gracias, Päivi. Tengo una para Auli ahora, que la hace Sandra Cepeda, y pregunta sobre la evaluación, ¿cierto?, de estas competencias genéricas o habilidades genéricas. ¿Conoces o puedes sugerir algún tipo de instrumento o estrategia que puedas recomendar para evaluar estas habilidades genéricas, que idealmente no solo sean autorreporte, considerando aulas masivas con un numeroso número de estudiantes?
Excuse me, could you repeat the question? Well, was it the question for me or Auli?
Fue para Auli, pero la voy a volver a leer igual para que quede claro. Dice,
okay, yes, sorry.
¿Qué estrategias?
Thank you. This is challenging and important question as well. My first thinking related to this is that I don't actually recommend assessing generic skills as a set of generic skills, but instead of that, I suggest that focus of assessment should be on, for example, on critical thinking, on collaboration, on group work, one of these or some of these at the time. And it is, for example, possible to assess critical thinking from written documents for students if they solve some authentic tasks or produce some responses. So they are self-reported responses, of course, but the characteristics of critical thinking can be assessed from the products or from the essays that students do. Of course, as you mentioned, it is challenging when it comes to big student groups, but still I think that we do big assessments where students produce essays. So I think that it is possible to add this kind of dimension to the assessment. So not only assess the content or discipline-specific aspects, but for example, adding aspects related to the quality of critical thinking or quality of argument. So I see that it is easily possible.
Muchas gracias. Claro, y yo creo, Auli, que quizás lo que tú estás planteando lo entiendo como que no se evalúan las habilidades genéricas en vacío, ¿cierto? Se pueden evaluar junto al contenido y de esa forma no se evalúan separadamente de una cátedra. Si se está estudiando, no sé, teorías del desarrollo humano, desde ahí se puede evaluar el pensamiento crítico comparando o criticando una teoría en relación a la otra. Entonces no tienes que ocupar un instrumento distinto, sino que la evaluación tiene que poder mirar esa capacidad crítica del estudiante.
Yes, exactly. Very, very important addition.
Bien, y ahora tengo una para Kathleen y después les voy a hacer una grupal. pensando un poco en el contexto de las clases online que han ocurrido a partir de la pandemia de manera quizás un poco improvisada, especialmente para países como el nuestro, que no tenían experiencia en pregrado de esta forma. ¿Crees que estos hallazgos que tú presentaste respecto al interés, qué les llama el interés a los estudiantes en las clases normales, por decirlo así, puede generalizarse a estas clases online o habrán algunos aspectos distintos o particulares que habría que prestar atención para que efectivamente los estudiantes participen más, se motiven, estén comprometidos en este proceso educativo remoto?
Yeah, this is a great question. I've had to, it's interesting because I did this lecture study just before the pandemic. People were very interested in it because lots of people were lecturing. Then we went into the pandemic and all of a sudden the rules changed with people being online. And we thought that the lecture would go away. And so it is strange that it's often replicated, and it doesn't replicate very well. And I think my study indicates the reasons why it doesn't replicate very well, because you have a lot of other cues that you can draw on when lecturing face-to-face that are just very difficult to come across in the online environment. And that would suggest the importance of rethinking how we do things for the online setting and rethinking it in a way to help build that student interest and to build those connections. So students' hopes are likely the same. Students still want that connection with their teachers. They still want that connection with peers. They still want the connection to real life and to their subject. And so how do we do need to think about how we rethink what happens online so that those connections, those hopes can still be fulfilled.
Perfecto. Muchas gracias, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Y acá tengo una pregunta que en realidad voy a partir con una inquietud que tengo yo para las tres, ya, a ver si podemos pensar en una respuesta común. Porque de alguna forma las tres han tocado un tema que para mí resulta muy interesante, que es este tema como de lo auténtico, de la autenticidad en el proceso educativo, que no solamente es en la evaluación auténtica, que es lo que yo estudio en particular, sino como en la autenticidad en el proceso educativo como gran paradigma para enfrentar el proceso educativo. Entonces Päivi, por ejemplo, habla o pone hincapié en esta interfaz entre el mundo del trabajo o la práctica y lo que pasa en las aulas, en la academia o en la universidad, y cómo nosotros podemos traer estos problemas del mundo del trabajo al aula, o cómo en el mundo del trabajo podemos llevar la teoría, ¿cierto? Y de alguna forma insertarse experiencialmente en un lugar de trabajo, pero trayendo permanentemente aspectos teóricos del aula y buscar esa integración en ambos mundos, ¿cierto? Y Auli también nos plantea esta idea de cómo también simular actividades que son típicamente donde uno desarrolla distintas habilidades genéricas, como los aprendizajes basados en problemas, o el aprendizaje basado en proyectos, o el trabajo con casos, para también buscar de alguna forma esta complejidad en términos de lo que produce aprender con un aprendiz activo, ¿cierto? Y Kathleen llega como al lugar de lo genuino también del docente en su experiencia de aprendizaje, como trae él historias, anécdotas, situaciones profesionales, se vincula de alguna forma de manera intersubjetiva con los estudiantes, mostrándole su perspectiva, vinculándose, estableciendo una relación en realidad con ellos. Pero si uno piensa, no debería ser tan complejo que ninguna de las tres cosas ocurra, o que no debería ser tan complejo, quiero decirlo más claramente, que esto se dé en el sistema educativo. No debería ser tan complejo que que los estudiantes puedan reflexionar en las prácticas de aspectos teóricos o en la clase de aspectos prácticos que han visto, o no debería ser tan complejo establecer una relación intersubjetiva profesor-alumno porque tiene que ver con el interés de poder compartir conocimientos y comprender cómo ellos están comprendiéndolo, y eso es como la base del feedback. Entonces, ¿cuáles eran las resistencias de estudiar? La pregunta es, ¿cuáles eran las resistencias de los profesores y los estudiantes o del sistema educativo que hace que esto no fluya necesariamente en algunas ocasiones como podría ser? Kathleen?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think what you're getting at is, how do we do this? Why are people not doing it? And I think at some level, it's actually quite challenging to do all of these things. And when I think about my own teaching, I often start with the content, and I think a lot of teachers do. This is the body of work they need to learn. And when you start there, then you actually have to do quite a lot of work to then say, okay, now how do I turn that into an engaging piece of instruction, an engaging unit or activity or task? And that translation requires creativity, and it requires an awareness of students, as I was highlighting. It requires understanding what your students know and care about, but it also means understanding what's the rest of the world needs, what the workplace needs. And that's not something that teachers always have either, if they've never worked in the kinds of industries that students might be going into. So it's actually seems easy, but it's not so easy, is my point.
Yes, my point links to what Kathleen said. I was thinking about Dan Lorty's concept, apprenticeship of observation. So you are maybe familiar with it. It means that we tend to apply such practices and pedagogies in our own teaching that we ourselves have experienced. And although we know based on research that what we should do and what we, in order to promote student learning of generic skills. And if we think about the age of the staff members and when they have been educated, so they have experienced a very different university education or higher education compared to current times. And it is not, as Kathleen said, it is not very easy to change and learn to teach and utilize new practices. It really takes time for teachers and staff members to learn to teach in a new way and adopt new approach in teaching. And what we have also been thinking about, the other thing is that we tend to collaborate and modify our practices and ways of working when it comes to research. But there we are quite flexible and quite innovative and collaborative and try and experiment new things. But when it comes to teaching, it is not that flexible or not that experimenting field. And I think that we have more tendency to control and plan and make sure that everything goes on according to a previously designed plan. These are the thoughts that they came to my mind related to this.
And I can
Gracias, Auli.
sorry. I can only agree with Kathleen and what Kathleen and Auli just said. And I remember when we first, many years ago, started to research work integrated or work-based learning at the universities. Some of the teachers, they had quite hard resistance against that, because they said that universities are for creation of new knowledge, and they should pass new knowledge to workplaces, and they are not in a position to serve workplaces. They saw it in that way, that it somehow would be a danger for traditional mission of universities. But nowadays, as our data from our newer studies show that nowadays teachers' attitudes have changed, and they have at least some teachers, and they see it important that we have collaboration with workplaces. But as Auli said, it is a big challenge for teachers, because they need to learn new ways of working and new skills, and make new networks, and it is hard work for teachers. So I think kind of professional development programs in this field would be very important for teachers who are interested in the collaboration with workplaces and want to utilize work-related learning in their courses.
Muchas gracias a las tres por sus respuestas. Yo pensaba también en esto de cómo iluminar a todos estos centros de desarrollo de la docencia, que muchas veces tienen que lograr como estas miradas que ustedes también han planteado, ¿cierto? Y ahí se viene, como que viene muy bien una pregunta que hace Sandra Cepeda, y que tiene que inicialmente estaba orientada a Päivi, pero creo que las tres las pueden contestar y pueden aportar, porque desde sus miradas van a entregar más luces, y que tiene que ver con qué característica debería tener el rol del supervisor, qué condiciones, qué competencias, qué características debería tener este rol de supervisor en estos lugares de práctica respecto a la evaluación de los estudiantes, la formación de los estudiantes. ¿Qué elementos, estándares podrían ustedes como entregar respecto a esta formación que se da en esta como interfaz?
If I start, thank you. This is also a very important question, and our studies showed that supervisors in the workplaces, at least in our data, they have been very interested in working with students. So I think that is one important point, that they are interested. So if that is something that they don't want to do and they are just asked to do, it is not a very good starting point. And I think also that, and at least in the Finnish vocational education and training area, and maybe in some higher education institutions as well, the departments have sometimes organized training for mentors, workplace mentors, about assessment practices and guiding of students. And I think that is very, very important, because supervisors or mentors at the workplace, they usually don't have pedagogical training. Sometimes they may have, and that is why they want to work with students. So they need some basics about assessment, and it is also important that they have knowledge about curricular objects. What are the students learning? What are they supposed to learn at the workplace? And so I think it is very important to invite people from workplaces to curriculum work with teachers when new curriculum is designed. So they will give ideas about what kind of skills employees in this particular field need at work, and they can design together with teachers and workplaces what kind of places they could have for students where to learn these kind of skills, and how to guide student learning, and how to assess student learning. And of course they need to discuss how to integrate what is learned at university and what is learned at the workplace, and how to make connections between this learning.
I think that if I can continue, Päivi put it really nicely, that actually the curriculum of higher education provides the big framework for supervision and learning also at the workplace. And the key word also in Päivi's, what you just said, was that the supervisor is the one who builds the connections and who explicates the links between practical work and learning at workplace and the theoretical studies in university or in higher education. And actually that's why the supervisor's role is so critical and so difficult. And at the same time, I would like to add that it's very important that supervisor takes into account the students' own learning goals that they have set for the workplace learning periods, what they think that they are willing to learn, that they need to learn, of course, in curricular framework, because we have found in our studies that actually the workplace periods are the most important ones, in addition to theoretical, especially the master thesis work, but they are really important periods for students, because they feel that they are like tests of reality tests and reality checks, that can I survive? Am I capable? Can I do and complete the things in real working life and workplace? And that's why it's really important that how they are supervised and supported.
Muchas gracias, Auli, Päivi. No sé si Kathleen quiere agregar algo.
No, I mean, obviously, both of the other speakers, Päivi and Auli, have highlighted the importance of supervisors in the workplace and their role and supporting students, and they have much more expertise on that than I do. So great, thank you.
Gracias. Y aquí aparece una última pregunta. Vean ustedes quién tiene más elementos para poder contestarla. Es de Tina Hobbins y dice: ¿tienen alguna sugerencia para desarrollar encuesta o algún tipo de cuestionario sobre las percepciones de los estudiantes utilizando un lenguaje que tenga más sentido para los alumnos, para los estudiantes, en lugar de palabras que usamos nosotros como investigadores o instructores?
The study that I was presenting took a two-stage process. So we asked students open-ended questions, and then we were able to draw from their own language when we constructed a survey. And I recommend that kind of mixed methods approach. Päivi or Auli, how have you done that?
Well, I think this is always a challenge to designing surveys for students. We need to operationalize the concepts we used in a way that they are. So we have to reach how students, average students, would speak about the thing we want to explore or we want to study. So and what we have been doing is that we pilot our questions to a smaller group of students and ask them feedback about what works and what does not work, what they don't understand and what they understand. I think that is very important phase in survey design.
Bien, no sé si Auli quiere comentar algo o suficiente con las opiniones de Kathleen y Pai.
Yes, I would only like to add that I think that it's very important to utilize both self-report measures and those that are not self-report ones, for example, performance-based assessments, because it is, as you probably know, it is a little bit different thing that how students perceive that they manage, or for example, group work skills or self-regulation skills or critical thinking, and how they actually perform in real situations. So it's really important to collect information in a variety of ways.
Perfecto. Muchas gracias a las tres panelistas, Päivi, Kathleen y Auli. Quiero agradecerles infinitamente su participación hoy día, porque hemos aprendido mucho, porque ha sido además un panel muy relacionado un tema con otro, por lo tanto nos ha permitido como mirar un mismo fenómeno desde distintas perspectivas. Y quiero agradecer también a la audiencia que ha estado con nosotros hasta el final de esta actividad. Quiero dejarlos cordialmente invitados al panel de mañana, el panel 7, que se llama Potenciando o Mejorando la Enseñanza, el Aprendizaje y la Evaluación en Educación Superior, que se realizará a las 9 de la mañana, hora chilena, y donde van a estar panelistas como Margaret Price, Vivi Virtanen, Tel Hailey Kari. No sé si mi pronunciación es la adecuada, pero creemos que también vamos a poder seguir profundizando en estas temáticas del encuentro internacional. Así que damos por cerrado el panel y muchas gracias.